So welcome to this recording of Digital Advertising 2020. This is an introduction to digital advertising best practice for 2019 and 2020. In this session, we're going to be having a look at a variety of different options that are available to you as you go through the consideration of whether or not digital advertising will fit into your mix of marketing and communications. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that you'd want to miss out on what could be a really, really powerful tool and set of channels that can really sort of invigorate the marketing communications that you're doing. And in this session, we will find out whether that will fit or not for you currently, and whether or not that this is going to be something that is going to really sort of superpower and supercharge your advertising and communications activity going forward. So in this session, we'll be looking at a variety of different concepts. We'll be looking at digital advertising in terms of a definition, actually what it is really, and how it might fit strategically or tactically into the kinds of things that you will be wanting to do. Now, for lots of organizations, they will be using digital advertising as part of the marketing mix in a very specific way. Lots of organizations will be considering it, but not necessarily particularly clear how they're going to be using it. And then lots of organizations will be just kind of dipping their toe in the water and thinking, is advertising, appropriate for me? So what we need to do is actually clarify very clearly the benefits, but also some of the key things and considerations that you need to be putting into your thinking before you actually set foot on this journey. The reason for that is, as you can see from the list of things that we're going to be looking at, is there's a lot of options open to you, and each of the different channels that you could potentially be using when you're thinking about digital advertising has its own little subtleties, its own little ways and values that could be very different to the other channels available to you. So some of the things that we'll be looking at Google Ads. It used to be called Google AdWords, but we'll be looking at Google Ads, which is the relatively new form of using Google for your advertising. Linked very, very closely to that is YouTube advertising. And of course, as the name suggests, that is very much sort of powered by video. So if video content is something that you think could be relevant, then we need to have a little look and think about that. We'll also be thinking about Facebook, and that always leads us on to thinking about the concept of remarketing, because with Facebook there is always the opportunity to not only position advertising actually within Facebook, but actually be looking at how that integrates with your broader customer journey, which may also include things like landing pages and your website. And remarketing, as you probably have found as a consumer of other people's messages and other people's marketing, is something that allows you as a marketer to kind of reposition a message to somebody you think would otherwise have been lost to your channel of communication. So remarketing is really quite an interesting one that brings people back into a mix when you think you've already lost them from the journey that they would otherwise have been on. Other things that also might be of interest to you are things like Instagram advertising. Obviously, Instagram right now is sort of widely known as a very obviously popular channel from an organic content perspective, but it can also be used sort of really successfully within the advertising mix. And at the moment, we're finding is actually quite an underpriced channel. So there's a big opportunity to get a very good return on investment. And we'll talk a little bit more about return on investment, ROI, a little bit later. If you're in a B2B environment, business to business, certainly the power of the targeting of business ads within something like LinkedIn really needs to be considered. Certainly the other channels that we've just mentioned, the Googles and Facebooks of this world, will undoubtedly provide some value to you. But if you're in B2B and you have either named individuals or sectors or job titles that are going to resonate with the product or service that you're looking to offer, certainly the level of targeting that's possible within LinkedIn will mean that you probably do want to consider that as part of the mix. And just to complete the set of the most attractive, potentially, digital advertising channels, we also need to just remember Twitter. It probably isn't in vogue as much as some of the other channels right now, but that isn't a reason for not considering Twitter. A lot of changes have happened at Twitter, probably compared to all those that I've mentioned so far. Twitter has been the one that's been given the most refreshes over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. So looking forward into 2020 for your digital advertising journey, I think certainly Twitter advertising should be part of the mix, at least to consider it. So we'll look at some of the benefits of doing that a little bit later. So first things first, we need to be defining what we actually mean by digital advertising. So we can think of digital advertising as online advertising in comparison, say, to offline or more traditional advertising. So that would be the likes of newspaper, magazines, billboards, poster advertising, TV, radio, and the like. So what we're talking about here is very much advertising that uses the internet as a medium or as a set of channels to getting your message out to the right target audience and delivering your communication in an appropriate way. The difference between digital advertising and all of the content which I normally start with and start talking about, which we would call organic content, is the fact that with digital advertising, online advertising, of course, this is a paid medium. So this is something where you are going to need to consider an appropriate level of budget. We'll talk about budget a little bit later, because I think most people then start to think, oh, well, I haven't really got any money to spend or very little money to spend, so maybe I shouldn't be interested in this. But one of the starting points when we start to define advertising is to not be thinking about the budget that you'd be requiring for this as a spend or as a cost, but potentially as an investment. If we start with that as a mindset, then all we're doing then is really starting to shape our expectations about advertising to deliver a return. So this is where the whole concept of return on investment comes from. Because if what we're doing is just thinking of digital advertising as a cost, what we're doing is really sort of positioning ourselves in a mindset that has a very low expectation of the value that it's going to return. And that is, of course, the opposite of actually what we want. So our starting point of thinking about digital advertising, this paid medium, as an investment rather than a cost, then sets that level of expectation that we need to be looking very clearly at a return. So what kind of returns can we be thinking about? Well, there are two types of returns that you should be starting to focus on. And a lot of the time, actually, it's very likely you are only going to be able to see one of these two. So the first return that you're going to see will be a strategic return. The second is going to be tactical, and I'll talk about that just in a moment. But the first return that you're going to see is a strategic return. So if you decide, actually, we want to do advertising digitally, irrespective of the channel. We're not going to worry about specific channels right now. We're just going to make a decision as to whether it's strategic or tactical. So if it's strategic, what we're looking for here is a return on investment of our digital advertising in the medium to longer term. So by taking that perspective, what we're looking to do is be potentially building our brand position, our brand awareness, our brand profile in the longer term. So brand building is a strategic thing which will give you a longer term benefit. So that will then start to help you thinking about the kinds of content that would be appropriate in your advertising, the kinds of channels that should be appropriate, and the kind of positioning in your overall marketing mix. So if it's a longer term thing that you're after, then let's start thinking about digital advertising from a strategic perspective. Also, then you need to be thinking, well, is it digital advertising? If I have these strategic goals that I'm looking for a longer term return on my marketing activity, is there an opportunity to put organic content first? In other words, not necessarily consider digital advertising at the outset. Because I would always come from the starting point that, you know, there is an opportunity to get some great returns from organic content. So this is unpaid content that you are either creating or curating. And By organic content, we're talking about videos, and we're talking about audio, and we're talking about imagery, and we're talking about the written word. So the organic content potentially could deliver these strategic goals that you're after. So, you know, this almost might take you full circle right at the outset, rather than thinking, okay, we have to go down the advertising route. If you're looking at the longer term objectives of building a brand, there is almost certainly a part to play for organic content first, or at least as part of a balanced mix. So maybe part organic content, part advertising. Another thing that you need to consider when you're thinking around this, is it strategic that I'm looking to gain here, is where in the customer journey are you expecting to put your advertising activities. So in other words, is this activity that you're going to put at the awareness stage, because as part of your brand building, you're looking to create some awareness of your brand, and so potentially you're looking at advertising to open up a new audience, or maybe you're looking at advertising to share a brand new product or service that's going to enhance how your brand is perceived, or maybe there's a part of digital advertising to play there in terms of speeding up that process and getting the word out there maybe a little faster than organic content could. So there's a consideration there if you're thinking about creating awareness of something specific. If it's a strategic approach that you're starting to think of this longer term view, is there a position in this whole journey, this whole customer journey, for thinking about remarketing and enhancing the conversion point in your customer's journey? In other words, you've already created some kind of brand awareness, and you're using advertising to now help people to almost tip over the edge from being a prospect into being a fully engaged customer. So you're looking them to convert. So you're making that purchase, you're changing that behavior. You're not just influencing and encouraging and persuading. What you're doing is you're actually changing behavior. And this is for the longer term benefit. It's not for a quick win, it's for a longer term benefit. So is that going to be appropriate? And there's also the third phase of the customer journey, which, as we know, is retention. So retaining existing customers. So is it appropriate that for the longer term benefits, you're thinking about digital advertising to position, a new product or service to your existing audience, to again, building that long-term sustainable kind of relationship with them? So optimizing the customer's lifetime value, as we call it. So by putting advertising in the mix there, is that going to be something that's going to potentially help you at that point as well? So strategically, digital advertising could have a part to play, and that is for this longer term benefit over and beyond just those quick sort of day-to-day wins that you might be looking for. But it could be that those are the things that are your highest priority. Now, of course, if you're looking at digital advertising from a tactical perspective, so you want to get more people to a particular event, you want to sell something in a time-bound nature, you want to raise awareness of a particular sort of activity that you're doing, but again, there is this sort of urgency behind it because of some sort of time restriction that you have, then using digital advertising in a tactical sense, in other words, to get some short-term wins, can also be very, very successful if you get this right. So the kinds of things that you would need to be considering here, and we'll talk a little bit more about budget in a moment, but is actually how much budget do you have, but also how much budget is enough to actually achieving these tactical targets. Now, this is a really, really tricky question to answer generically, because depending on the audience that you have, depending on the channels that you're thinking about, depending on the customer that you're targeting, depending on how busy this particular sort of sector is, or this particular audience is, or this particular space is for the kinds of words, the kinds of things that you're looking to sort of piggyback onto, it's a very, very difficult thing to answer this with a specific number. The trick, though, in terms of tactical advertising digitally, is to start small. This is a simple single technique that really allows you to test the water before you jump in at scale. So the general answer to how much budget is enough is a very small amount is enough to allow you to test out and maybe do what we call A/B testing. So by putting something out as an ad at a very, very low level of spend, and I'm talking a very, very low level of spend, super targeted, so that you can know that your advert is being positioned in front of somebody who you're looking to target, and then literally just spending a very, very small amount of budget and then tweaking the ad just by one particular element so that you can do what we call A/B testing, so that you can see that ad A got a response in a certain level, and then ad B got a slightly different response. Well, was that up or was it down? And was that difference made by that one thing that you tweaked? So it allows you then to continually fine tune until you get to a point where you think, we've spent now maybe $100, maybe $200, small amounts of spend. And now we know that we've optimized this ad. So now we can start to commit with confidence, knowing that we're going to get a good return on investment. We can now commit budget at scale to scale up the success of that initial testing. So tactically, how much budget is enough? Well, very, very small amount to begin, and then you can decide based on the amount of results that you want, and then reverse engineering back from the data that you've collected in those tests, you can then decide actually how much budget you need to be hitting your targets. So it's quite a simple little process of testing and then reverse engineering back from your desired outcome. That really helps you to set the budget. Long gone are the days where you're given a budget of X amount of pounds or dollars and then just go spend those on advertising without actually almost a care in the world as to how you're going to prove the performance or how you're going to show evidence of the ROI. Now, because we have every single piece of data that we could ever want as marketers, it is down to us now to be proving the value of everything that we do. So keeping very close to how these little tests are performing is the really key art of setting out your tactical stall. And then once you've decided actually, which ads are performing best, it's then deciding, okay, so what am I trying to achieve with these ads on a tactical basis? So am I looking to create reach? And of course, by deciding if I'm going to create reach, which is the amount of people who potentially could be inspired or motivated or driven to some kind of action as a result of seeing my ad, if that's what I'm after, I just want to spread the word and hope that we're going to get some sort of attraction here. That is what's reach. That's what's called reach. And that could be a target. Personally, I go a little bit deeper than that because I would be looking for some kind of engagement at the very, very least. So my KPI, my key performance indicator of tactical advertising for me should at least be engagement. In other words, did I see some kind of response? So going back to this A/B testing, if my ad B gets more engagement than my ad A, I know then that ad B is getting me a little bit closer to my desired outcome. Now, it could be that actually engagement isn't enough for you and actually you want to move on to the next level, which would be a conversion. In other words, you want to see an actual behavioral change as somebody clicks on the purchase button or they actually complete the form or whatever it is you define as a conversion. At that point, that is your KPI. So that is actually what you're trying to get them to do. And it's really important in tactical digital advertising to ensure that you have a very, very specific KPI that you're focused on at every single moment. It is no longer enough to just say, hey, I'm doing some spend and we'll kind of see what happens to then figure out what the ROI was. You've got to go into this with an ROI target before you begin. So whether it's strategic activity or tactical activity, knowing your desired outcomes is a really, really important starting point before you begin the actual activity of choosing the channels that you're going to be looking at. Okay, so the next thing then that we're going to be thinking about is, okay, well, how do I want to actually spend this budget? So let's assume that we're going to go down the tactical route. So we want to, over the next couple of months, we want to get some engagement to lead to some conversions. Okay, so how am I then going to see this ROI coming through? Well, there are many, many different ways that you can actually be monitoring the advertising activity that you do. But the key thing really before you start is to figure out actually what is going to be important to me. So we will see lots of different definitions of kind of reporting that's coming through. And a lot of the ways that these channels, be they Google or Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, are actually going to give you some reports are based around the actual activities that your target audience is going to do as a result of seeing your ad. So what we often see then is advertising budget being spent in what we might call a CPM way. In other words, this is the cost per 1,000 views, if you like, of this ad in response to a specific audience. So you are then going to be paying your budget when your messages are exposed, and this isn't looking at any kind of engagement or any kind of click-through. This is just exposure to specific audiences. So if your target is, I just want to get the word out there, then certainly putting your budget in terms of actually the cost per 1,000 times that this audience has actually seen your ad could be an appropriate measure in which to set your actual budget. For me, as I've said, I'm a little bit more kind of sort of action orientated. So I tend to go for when there's some kind of engagement or interaction. So for me, I tend to be focusing on channels where I can see a cost per click or CPC. So something like Google Ads is a really good example of CPC. This is where, as an advertiser, my budget gets spent every time a visitor clicks on my ad. So it doesn't really matter to me how many times this ad is seen. My key measure is how many times that ad is actually then clicked on. And again, with my A/B testing, I can test ad A got a click-through rate of X, and my ad B got a click-through rate of Y, and I can make those comparisons as to which one performs better, which one I should be putting my budget towards. So it starts to allow me to be able to kind of fine-tune and hone in on really where I'm looking to be spending most of my money. It also might be that you say, well, actually what we want to do is be driven by conversions. So for you, it could possibly be the fact that, you only want to be paying your budget actually when somebody is actually then ticking on the I will purchase button, or they're actually going through a conversion process. So you can, if you look at the cost per action budget setting process in some of the channels that we'll be looking at in just a moment, you can actually set your budget to only pay when this specific action is performed. Now, of course, there are different, depending on the channels and depending on the audience and depending on the keywords that you're going to be bidding on, and depending on how you structure your advertising campaign, there obviously are different budget levels here, and generally the bigger value per budget spend comes at the higher end of the value that you're going to get. So generally when a purchase happens, the CPA is going to be a higher budget that you're going to need than the cost per click or the cost per 1,000. But that isn't always the case. So you have to be very much driven by the scenario that you're creating when you look at how you've actually built these ads together. So let's get into the first one. Let's have a little look through some of these examples. Now, obviously, within the range of time that we have available for this particular webinar, we can only really do a sort of a quick skim, if you like, over each of these 5 or 6 different channels that we're looking at. So we're going to look at Google Ads, we're going to look at YouTube, Facebook, a little word on remarketing, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then Twitter. And I'm just going to give you some of the flavors behind some of these of things to really be thinking about as you look into them. I've got a very good link to HubSpot blog, which I'd recommend if you are thinking and considering Google Ads as your possibly next sort of inclusion in your marketing mix. It's a very, very good little article which shows you how to be using it, particularly on a pay-per-click campaign. Now, certainly when you look at Google Ads, it is clearly one of these starting points. Google Ads, by the way, was the new name and the new platform for what used to be called Google AdWords prior to 2018. And a lot of the research that we've seen over the sort of previous years is that there is a potential for a huge ROI on Google Ads. Some sort of commentators will tell you that, for every £1 you spend, you'll see $8 returned. Now, of course, this is very sort of generic kind of numbers, and clearly you might get a lot better than that. You might get to challenge whether or not actually you could reach that. But very much when we look at Google Ads, for me, it is is very much targeted around a pay per click. So we're actually seeing a tangible activity by your audience as a result of engagement with your advertising. So it is very sort of target driven. It's very much driven by a call to action. Typically what we're doing here is we're bidding on what we call competitor or long tail phrases. So when we're looking at doing here is we're looking to create a range of different search terms, if you like, that should resonate with the target audience that you're looking to target. And when we talk about long tail phrases, what you'll find is the longer and more specific the phrase that you can include when you're targeting through Google Ads, the more attractive to you the budget is going to be. So the lower budgets come from the longer tail phrases, the really specific phrases that you can put into your ad campaigns, because there are less people bidding, or less competitors, or less people, you know, sort of in that space bidding on these longer tail phrases. If you go for very generic terms that everybody's bidding on, clearly the cost of those terms is going to be a lot higher. Another thing to consider as well when you're looking at Google Ads is having a very strong, relevant landing page for these ads to go to. So when somebody clicks on your ad, this needs to be a very, very strong and motivating landing page. Otherwise, that click is not going to provide you with the value of return that you're looking for. So again, it comes back to the journey. So make sure that you're linking your content on your landing page. So somebody clicks on your Google ad, they land on your landing page. Make sure then that the term that they were coming through having clicked on as a search to find that ad to then land on your landing page, those things are joined up, so they're all highly relevant, and so they see that it's a very relevant click through, and then you'll be able to then very much target them with the kinds of messages and actually get them to the next stage in the journey. Another really important thing to consider when you're looking at Google Ads is location. I speak a lot about location when it comes to organic content, and within Google Ads, it's a highly, highly relevant thing to be thinking about, possibly more so than all of the other channels. The reason being, Google is very, very location specific when it serves up your ad. So the more geographically specific you can be in your advertising and in the target keywords, the more effective your Google Ads are going to be. For more information on Google Ads, I'd suggest you go and search on Google AdWords PPC in HubSpot.com, and you will find a really, really useful guide in there for taking that bit to the next level. Very much sort of aligned with Google Ads is part of the Google family is YouTube. YouTube advertising, if you're starting to see a bit of a momentum shift towards video within your marketing mix, then certainly YouTube advertising, and particularly if you have an existing YouTube channel, YouTube advertising can be a really, really powerful method of using your digital marketing spend. I've got a very good link on bigcommerce.co.uk for the benefits of advertising and some very, very good step-by-step guides for advertising on YouTube. So I recommend you do that. YouTube is the #2 search engine on the planet, very, very strong for increasing reach. So if reach is one of your key things, we talked a little bit about reach versus actually click-through a little bit earlier. And if reach is one of your key goals, so you're looking to reach a new channel or a new audience, and if you have a very, very specific target audience, then certainly YouTube may well be sort of in the mix for you to consider as part of your test campaigns when you kick off. Now, you've got a choice when you start out with YouTube. You can go wide, so you can go with targeting by topics, by categories, or by keywords, or you can go narrow, being really, really specific on YouTube, almost down to the level, well, it is down to the level of specific YouTube pages that you'd like your ads to appear on. So, of course, be thinking in advance of this, not just generically, hey, I want to advertise on YouTube, but be thinking about, well, okay, so who's influential on YouTube? Could I actually post my ads directly through my Google Ads campaign, but with a spin towards YouTube on very specific influencers' pages because my ad is relevant to the audience who are being influenced by those influencers. So do you see how this is starting to then sort of blend in with your broader content marketing strategy? This might allow you to get very quickly and very effectively into a particular target audience's view, again, increasing the reach in a very, very quick, potentially quite cost-effective way. And when we're talking about influencers, we aren't necessarily talking about the big celebrity influencers. Be thinking about niche micro influencers in the target sectors that you're looking to influence. Now, there are certain ways that you can actually be positioning this ad if you're looking to get into this market. One of the ways is what we call True View, where you're paying for your advertising on the basis of a sustained view of your ad. Now, if you're using TrueView, basically what you'll find is that people can sort of click through and actually go back to the original video that they were watching. And so you aren't necessarily going to be increasing the reach very successfully, although you might if you include some of your key messages very early in your advert. One of the key things to do here is to be thinking about potentially using the pre-roll advertising method on YouTube, which is the method that we see when you're watching YouTube and you're getting into a sort of 15-second burst that is compulsory and can't be skipped. And, you know, if we're watching YouTube, you know that that can be positioned at the start or the end or mid video that you're watching. So you can, if the target influencer is allowing sort of, you know, advertising within their channel, you have a good chance of actually sort of positioning your advert within pre-roll so it can't be skipped. Obviously, what you need is a very, very clear call to action within that. And I would suggest that if you're going for this kind of slightly higher end advertising model within YouTube, is that you're drawing people into further video content on your own channel. So be thinking about how that advert that appears in somebody else's, potentially a micro-influencer's YouTube video, think about how that click-through, that call to action is going to drag that person, you know, sort of, you know, positively into your own channel. So that is a really, really sort of effective way potentially of both increasing the reach, but also getting that click-through so that you can really see some measurable value coming through. Now, this whole thing about click-through leads us very nicely into Facebook advertising, which I would suggest is probably something that you will want to consider as part of your digital marketing mix. Now, the old days of using boosted posts on Facebook are very much long gone. You're very unlikely, I would suggest, to see a huge amount of value from boosted posts. So what I would be suggesting here is that you go straight to Facebook Business Manager to both set up your campaigns and to then be monitoring the ROI from them. Facebook itself is really encouraging business page owners to be taking this process. And one of the big values of it is that it moves you away from having to use your personal account to boost posts, because everything done in Business Manager is done on behalf of your business account, your business page, rather than you as a person sort of on a personal account. So of course you can have multiple people logging into Facebook Business Manager from your organization. So that's a really nice kind of starting point. There's a lot of really, really good guides on adespresso.com. And I would suggest searching Facebook Business Manager Guide on adespresso.com in their blog area, because there's some really, really effective guides on there on how you both set up Facebook Business Manager, but then also how you use it to create campaigns. So first things first, you do need this business page before you can do that. You can do it as part of setting up your Facebook Business Manager process. But if you've already got one, then you'll probably want to then just literally link that through to your Business Manager page. So for getting boosted posts, this is all about the integration of both Facebook and Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, advertising all in one place. So there's a really, really effective kind of dashboard here that you're creating, which allows you to run multiple campaigns, do this A/B testing that we're talking about, and arguably have the most focused audience specification that you're going to find anywhere on the internet for digital advertising. So I would suggest probably, if this is your starting point for, you know, deciding whether or not this is for you, I would suggest probably Facebook Business Manager is the best starting point to really learn about the ins and outs of digital advertising, some of the benefits of doing it, some of the terminology, some of those little acronyms that are presented to us as we go through the process of setting up ads. Facebook Business Manager will allow you to kind of touch onto all of those things and give you a really, really effective sort of grounding, if you like, in those areas. Now, as a beginner or as a sort of an initial introduction into Facebook Business Manager, it starts off looking quite complicated, and it is. We're not talking necessarily at this point about remarketing and all of the things that Facebook Pixel will allow you to do, but you will see Facebook Pixel mentioned early in the process of setting up your ad campaigns. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but Facebook Pixel is one of these little pieces of code that allows you to remarket and allows you to kind of go back to people in their journey when they haven't necessarily done what you hoped they would do. So they haven't necessarily clicked through to purchase. They haven't necessarily gone as deep into the advertising journey that you wanted them to do. And so by putting Facebook Pixel, this little piece of code actually onto your website, it allows Facebook to then look at your website and say, hey, there's a landing page there. We know the people who are coming through to this site. We know where they live, we know their demographics, we know their age, and we know that they're probably likely to be an audience that you might want to retarget later. So by putting Facebook Pixel onto your website, it's just a little piece of code that you'll pick up on the journey of creating Facebook Business Manager. It allows you to unlock lots of sort of hitherto untapped information from your website that Facebook can use to do things like retargeting. But a little bit more about that a little bit later. What you're able to do within Facebook Business Manager is to begin to think about your audiences and to really build audiences that are really, really focused on hitting your marketing plan objectives. So there are three kinds of audiences that you'll encounter. The first one is a custom audience. That's where you go down and kind of create your customer persona that you want to target in Facebook Business Manager, and that allows you to then literally target them with specific ads. Okay, so that's kind of your starting point. Once you start to build up an audience of people, either directly through this Facebook Pixel, where Facebook starts to learn who's visiting your website, or you do it manually because you can integrate things like your email list from MailChimp, you can create what are called lookalike audiences. In other words, the people who like your business page or the people who are following your business page. For example, you could create a lookalike audience, so people who kind of answer to that description, but maybe reside in a different country or a different territory, or just a slightly different sort of spin or look and feel to the ones who are already encountered with you. So a lookalike audience allows you to move to this kind of scale of attracting an audience in. So it allows you to kind of build and grow really from the position where you are. And there are also saved audiences, and the saved audiences are the ones where, having seen a particular type of result through your Facebook Business Manager activities and through your campaigns, you're able to then kind of save that profile of person for retargeting a little bit later. So it's a hugely, hugely powerful thing to be focused on. And I would suggest probably a little bit like YouTube, where I've said about keeping your target audience that you're targeting within YouTube. I'd say as well, thinking about Facebook Business Manager and the targeting here, is that if you are going to use Facebook for advertising, is point to something within Facebook. Keep people engaged within Facebook. So the call to action, the click through then potentially is to your Facebook page, or ideally a product catalog or Facebook store within your page for a process or for future engagement. And that doesn't necessarily have to be tangible products. It could be services or it could be events. Facebook Business Manager will really start to work for you if you keep your advertising call to actions within Facebook. It's one of those Facebook things that they really, really encourage and give extra kind of value to you as a Facebook citizen, if you like, as an advertiser, if you keep all the transactions and everything kind of happening within the Facebook community. So that's probably the best piece of advice really I can give you on that. Once you start to use both the advertising on Google, so Google Ads, as well as Facebook, you'll see building the concept of remarketing. If you go to searchenginejournal.com and search for Google Ads Facebook Get Started, there's a really, really good tutorial and article in there about the whole concept of creating events to allow you to retarget when people actually sort of complete an event. So what do we mean by event? You'll see this pop up as you create advertising digitally all over the place, whichever channel that you're looking at. An event is something that your target customer or your target prospect has completed. So this isn't necessarily a good event. It could be that they've put all the products that you were looking to offer them into a shopping basket, but then they've gone off and left the site. So the event could be that they've skipped the purchase process entirely and they've kind of moved away from your site. If you specify that as an event, and you can do that in Facebook, you can do that in Google Ads, then what those two channels are able to do is to then remarket back to those people who completed that event. So this person who's now left that basket unattended and gone off to another website, it allows you then to set up a specific advert, and this could be a very, very specific advert, to remarket to them. So they will then see this advert when they go to another site, potentially, this could be Amazon, it could be another site that is using maybe the Amazon network. It could certainly be, if they're still logged into Facebook and you're doing Facebook remarketing, it will certainly be then triggering up into their Facebook either timeline or sort of advertisements and promoted posts on the right-hand side. It allows you then to get your message back in front of people. The return on investment of remarketing can be exceptionally high if you get this right. If you think about the journey, but you've got to start with what is your goal. You've got to have that Facebook or Google ad pixel embedded onto your website. You've got to be able to know this audience. You've got to know what is going to be acceptable from them and think about the journey that you're trying to give. There will undoubtedly be times when, you've been remarketed too, and you get to see this ad popping up on every single site and you sort of think, oh my goodness, just go away. I stopped the process for a particular reason. And of course, then that isn't necessarily building this longer term brand sort of perception that you're looking for. So you've got to be thinking about, if you're going to be thinking about remarketing, once you start this process off, you've got to be thinking about how is this going to affect my brand as much as how is it going to affect my tactical sort of upside in the short term. So it's a balance. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying be just very, very careful the way that you position remarketing. Yes, it can give you that little bit of a kick, and maybe those people who were sort of tempted and weren't quite committing, maybe you can get them to commit. But also, what about the people who would potentially have committed later, but now, because you presented this to them in a quite sort of salesy manner from their perspective, maybe now they're very, very averse to using your brand again. You've got to strike this balance appropriately. But if you can get it right, then potentially both on Google Ads, but also on Facebook, this is a very, very strong way of getting a great ROI. Another channel that gives you huge ROI right now, and the main reason is because it's still very, very underpriced, is Instagram. Now with Instagram, it's very, very much managed through your Facebook manager. Instagram owned by Facebook. Facebook Business Manager allows you to position your ads either exclusively in Instagram, and you can do that both through the feed or through Instagram stories, and you can do it via video or images. My personal preference right now would be to try both in Instagram stories and on the Instagram feed. And again, it is literally just a box ticking exercise to position that before you place your ad, but also be thinking about trying both images and video. So my recommendation is to do kind of all four combinations, so video and image on both feed and Instagram stories, because different sectors, different audiences, different target personas will respond differently. And what you've got to figure out is, out of those four options available to you, if you're doing this little budget to start with, figuring out which one you're going to scale up, it's worth trying all four options there. So try every combination of video and image on both feed and Instagram stories and see which one resonates best. Still very much underpriced and managed through Facebook Business Manager. Potentially, this could be an area where you find that the reason it being underpriced is because not so many people are advertising within Instagram in relative terms as they are in Facebook or on YouTube or through Google Ads. So if you can get in quickly, certainly through the rest of 2019 and into 2020, this is the timing right now to be testing Instagram advertising as part of your mix. Do it even if you don't think that Instagram advertising is going to give you a return. You might be surprised. Moving on to surprises, one of the big surprises is just how significant LinkedIn business ads are becoming. LinkedIn really is the up and coming, and it's a really strange way of saying this, but it's really the up and coming both organic content but also digital advertising platform on the internet right now. Probably, if you look at your statistics across all the channels that you use, if LinkedIn is in that mix, you're probably seeing bigger month for month, year for year growth trends in LinkedIn than you are on anything else. There's a lot of activity happening in LinkedIn right now. Certainly sponsored content is one way that you can go here, and particularly if you have already got a content strategy that you're using within LinkedIn on an organic content basis, this could be a way of really sort of, supercharging your content. It is costly, but it could be a very effective way of getting that message to a more targeted or potentially larger audience. The beauty of LinkedIn business advertising is the depth that you can actually target to, and this requires quite a bit of planning ahead. When you start the whole LinkedIn business ad sort of process and you start to profile who you're going to be targeting, it allows you to target, believe it or not, down to an individual person level. Now, I've been speaking that this would be kind of the ultimate kind of targeting for a long time, many years, and we now have that ability in LinkedIn business ads to be able to target down to an individual. You might not want to go quite that intimate. You might want to take it up to the level of a job title, or maybe up to the level of a particular sector, or up to a particular industry, or maybe you're looking at a particular country or sectors or industries within a particular country. You might want to look at specific job titles in a particular sector, etc. This cross-fertilization of all of this big data within LinkedIn allows you to be as specific as you want to be within this advertising channel. SearchEngineJournal.com has got a great LinkedIn advertising guide. So SearchEngineJournal.com, I'd suggest if LinkedIn is on your radar right now because you're posting content or you think that content might resonate with your target audience in there, SearchEngineJournal.com, great article in there, which is very current, very relevant, and allows you to kind of build upon some of these early ideas. One of the areas that I would suggest avoiding, though, is the sponsored in-mail option. Now, in-mail is LinkedIn's email system, which allows you to send direct mail into the inbox of other LinkedIn users. Personal view, but I'm finding that that is becoming really tiresome, to the point of literally just wringing your hands every time you log into LinkedIn, because the amount of spam that's happening now. A lot of this stuff is sponsored, automated in-mail. I don't think your brand is going to be sort of well received if you start doing that. You could try it and you could test it out, and maybe possibly it might work for you, but I would avoid that option. I would go more for the slightly more costly, but certainly more relevant sponsored content rather than sponsored in-mail, because to me that is much more relevant to the target audience, irrespective of your message that you're putting out there. And how do you start that targeting? Well, certainly there is an option as you go through the little wizard of creating your LinkedIn business ad of the concept of content suggestions. It will suggest the kind of trending topics right now that are happening. There is a lot of conversation going on both in groups and on people's timelines. There's a lot of really powerful message threads happening. So tick on content suggestions to see and make sure that if you're using this on a tactical basis, that you're aligning your advertisement with the kinds of content that is resonating on LinkedIn right now. And building on that whole concept of the kind of sort of the current trending topics, obviously we still have in the mix here of the things to consider as channels, we have Twitter advertising. Now, Twitter has kind of almost sort of gone out of favor, I guess, with a lot of marketers who have now moved towards the whole kind of Facebook, Instagram and remarketing thing. But I would suggest that probably Twitter advertising, which is now coming down in price because it is at the moment quite a sort of a lesser attractive channel to a lot of marketers, I think it probably is the time to go back in and have another look. If you've tried this in the past, you'll notice that over certainly the last 12 months, the interactivity that you have as an advertiser in Twitter has really, really improved. There's some really, really great sort of features. A lot of the sort of Facebook style profiling. It's not as powerful as Facebook, but a lot of the Facebook profiling has now been sort of integrated as a concept within Twitter. So it is allowing you now to become a little bit more targeted. Within Twitter, the call to action, so that reason for clicking is absolutely critical, and it's it's going to be the make or break to your advertising in Twitter. Unless you're super clear about shall I click on this ad or not, and you actually put the call to action within the actual image of your ad as well as in the text for your ad, and unless you're really, really specific about your call to action, it's unlikely that your Twitter advertising is going to fly. Little example given, start your free trial now. Click on this now. It's a time-bound offer. Making those buttons and those links really, really specific about and sort of really enhancing the urgency of the click-through. That is very much how people use Twitter. It's short, little sound bites, so it means it's short and punchy, which means that your call to action and your communication has to also be punchy in your advertising. So put your offers and your call to action in the ad image as well as. You have a choice of boosted posts, which possibly in Twitter advertising are still relevant, but there are also Twitter cards. Cards are much more slick in terms of the way that they're presented to you. They look like a proper ad. They look quite professional. So again, though, if you are considering that, is kind of what is the objective? Make sure the objective before you sort of go down this route is very, very clear in your mind. What is the click-through on that card directed at? Twitter now actually also has a pixel, so you can do remarketing. But I would suggest if you do that in Twitter to be excluding past converters. In other words, people coming through on Google Ads and on Facebook as a remarketing channel, often what you miss is the fact that you might also be remarketing to people who actually did go back to that basket and did actually purchase, and yet you're still presenting them with the advertisement of please go back and complete that transaction and giving them all those incentives when they actually have already done it. This is something within Twitter they're very, very hot on. So make sure that you exclude past converters, people who did actually go back. And again, it's just the tick of a button as you set up your Twitter ad campaign. And remember, with Twitter, predominantly with Twitter, but also with the likes of Instagram particularly, that everything is mobile first. When you're designing your ad through any of these channels, but particularly in something like Twitter, think of mobile first. Don't think that you're presenting this ad on a big screen. The vast majority of statistics show us very, very clearly that people will be engaging with your ad on a mobile basis. So when you preview your advert, either in your Facebook Business Manager or on your Twitter sort of ad creation page, you want to be previewing it in mobile first. So make sure your mobile ad is delivering exactly what you expect it to be delivering. Don't rely, just because you're creating it on your laptop, don't rely that it's going to look like that when people look at it on their mobile, because that generally is the place that they are going to be viewing it from. So what are your next steps? Well, for me, there are probably 6 steps to taking this thing forward. So the first thing would be to think about, okay, am I doing this to build my brand strategically, or am I looking at this to create some tactical sales? Where am I positioning my advertising in the journey? So from my customer's perspective, it isn't just about me, it's all about, actually, is this going to provide value to my customer? So am I creating awareness so that they get value through that? Am I helping them to convert? Am I going to be remarketing to them, in other words? Or am I helping to retain existing customers? Where in the journey should I be positioning this digital advertising? What kind of ROI am I after? Is the budget versus the desired outcome appropriate? Am I balancing the amount I'm spending with the amount I'm expecting to get? Have I really thought this through? Am I just spending money to see what happens? Hopefully it's going to be a little bit more considered. And when I do consider that, what are going to be my KPIs, my key performance indicators? In other words, what am I going to set before I even start looking at these channels? What am I going to set as my expectation as to what I'm going to be happy with? Am I happy with reach? In other words, am I happy just spreading the word? Am I more happy to get engagement? That would be my personal preference as a starting point. Am I also really happy to get conversion? Is that my target? Am I only going to be happy if I actually make some sales? Or am I going to be happy if I get retention? Your KPIs are your own internal happiness monitor or happiness indicator. Set your KPIs based on something that is going to make you happy. It's not just about your marketing or high level strategic objectives. Your KPIs are going to be those things that are going to give you the confidence to do more of this stuff, to scale it up, to see that this balance of channels that you've selected is right. And of course, that will allow you then to start to prioritize which channels you're going to go for first. You could go for all of them. I would suggest possibly, if this is early in the days for you, not necessarily worrying too much about remarketing at this stage, but maybe doing those little A/B tests of some little ads using Facebook Manager. Maybe go onto Google Ads and see if you can do some little A/B tests, small amounts of budget, see what you can do. And then comparing how those things perform in isolation, and then comparing how those digital ads perform versus your organic content. So it's all about learning from the data. As I always say and always suggest, it's all about the detail, it's all about the analytics, and it's all about the evidence of which things to scale up and which things then to be reducing out of the mix, because they're not really producing a huge amount of value for you. So those would be the 6 things I would suggest that you do. Decide whether it's brand building or tactical sales. Where are you going to position it in the journey? What target is your ROI? What are your KPIs? What's going to make you happy? What's your top priority first? And then compare any of your spend activity versus what you could have got for free. So I've had a few questions that have popped up as we've been going through this webinar. So I just want to cover some of those as I look down the list. So somebody's asked, I don't have a big following for a lookalike audience, so where should I start? Okay, well, if you remember back, I said about the lookalike audience was something that was going to be presented to you in Facebook Business Manager. Lookalike audience is a really good one once you do have some kind of audience. So if you have a good following on Facebook on your business page, you can kind of jump straight into that one and use a similar or lookalike audience to start profiling. If you don't, I'd start with your customer persona. So go through the exercise of really profiling who you would love to attract in a perfect scenario, in a perfect world, because you can plug that into Facebook Business Manager and say, hey, I want this kind of person. Facebook Business Manager then in the future, once you started to attract a few of those, will start to do some magic behind the scenes to allow you to then profile people who look and sound and behave in a certain way similar to that audience. And then you can do some fine tuning and you can do some remarketing later, but start with your customer persona. Another question is, you say keep your budget small, but how small is small? Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I think really I am talking about maybe tens of dollars or tens of pounds when you're just doing these little A/B tests. You can set things up at a very, very low budget. It does mean, of course, the numbers are very, very low as well. But, to find and learn in the early days is way more important than actually spending stuff to really get results. What you're looking to see here is patterns. You're looking to see so where you can get some quick wins. You're looking to see which kinds of ads resonate better with the target audience. You're looking to compare target audiences. Maybe, audience 1 responds better than audience 2 when you profile them. So go after audience 1 and then figure out why that's the case. So it's all about tiny, tiny, small amounts of money at the starting point. So I'd say it's tens of dollars. It certainly isn't hundreds. So when you start to set that budget, think about how much can I get for very, very little spend. Another question was, does remarketing annoy customers? Well, I think cover that a little bit, but I think where you can put in exclusions, and you'll see exclusions in both the Twitter ads and in Facebook Business Manager, where you can exclude out of the event people who have actually gone beyond that event. So in other words, if somebody comes to the basket and then they've gone away, if they then come back later, they'll then be excluded from seeing your ad if you're presenting that ad to people who've left the basket. So these platforms are so clever and so sort of integrated now that the platform will know. So just assume that will happen as long as you click some really careful exclusions. But I think it comes back to really understanding your persona and understanding the journey. If you've really got this intimate relationship with your target customer, you'll know how much is enough. Yes, over remarketing will annoy them. Over remarketing will be too much. But, it's better to do a little bit and test it out. Then you'll kind of find out what that balance is. Another question, how do I know the best time for my ad to appear? That's a really good question, I like that one. The platforms, again, little bit sort of building on the remarketing, your platforms will guide you unless you have a huge amount of really reliable existing data coming through from your social media analytics. And again, we'll use Facebook as an example here. The Facebook Insights will already know the best times for engagement, the best times for interactions, the best times for reach, the best times for click-throughs. All of that data will already exist. So I would suggest, unless you know that because you're already monitoring it, is let the platforms guide you by it. So don't necessarily you decide when it's going to be switched on and off unless you're really confident. Look and learn from what the platforms guide you. They might not be 100% perfect, but then this is not a totally precise science. So I would say just go with the flow with this testing, this A/B testing, and kind of watch and learn, because you'll pick up patterns, you'll pick up trends very quickly. And just looking at the time, we have time for one more question, which I'm going to pick up this last one that's come through here, is would I recommend paid or organic to focus on for a marketing plan? I always say organic first. I think for me, organic first is a really key thing, because not just because it's free, but because you have so much more control over organic content. I think if you've got a really good organic content strategy, that would always be my starting point. But I think I would recommend balancing that with an exploration of paid advertising. If you need something that has to get out there on a time-bound nature. So as I say, if there's an urgency for whatever reason, it's a product launch or it's a conference or something like that, that you want to get a particular set of actions happening or a set of sales in a defined period of time, then I think there's a really good point for going down the paid route and at least exploring it. I think where lots of organizations really burn way too much money is where they rely on paid for long-term strategic brand building. Because I think if you get your organic content right, and I'm probably not going to be thanked by Facebook or Google or any of these platforms for saying this, but I think if you get your organic content right for free, then that will answer many of the challenges that you have as a digital marketer. If you need that little bit of extra help, then balancing it with paid, I think, is a really powerful way of doing it. But I would suggest probably that you're going to get as much benefit as you need in the sort of the medium term from going down the whole organic route. And probably, if I had to focus, most of the time I would always sort of go down the 80-20 rule, because for me it just kind of works. So I would go down 80-20 first and see what you can achieve with 80% organic, I would suggest, and maybe 20% paid, unless you have a form that works right now. If you've got a process that works and it's all scaled up and everything is working great and you're remarketing and you've got this lovely balance, then you've cracked it, and that's totally fine. I think what I'm talking about here are people who are starting out on this journey of considering digital advertising as part of the mix. So I'd suggest it's probably 80-20 if that is the case. But maybe in time, if you can find it, you can get this great ROI. Remember, we've been saying everything is about evidence. So if you can find and you can prove that there is evidence in the mix that you have, then I would suggest probably there is a good time for doing that and for achieving it. So yeah, go for it if that is the case. But start with organic and maybe top it up with digital after that. So thank you very much for coming along to this webinar. Hopefully you found it useful. You can put any sort of further questions, and if you're watching this on catch up, please add any questions below. Be more than happy to explore them with you, or hopefully answer them if I know the answer. And do use the links that I've included in the presentation. If you're watching this, you'll be able to see the links in the presentation. If you're listening to this on audio, you can go to neilwilkins.online to see the blog in which all of these links are included. Hope you found this useful, and I will look forward to talking to you again very, very soon. Thanks for coming along.